Well, Dr. Zach Bush, I always know it's going to be a great day for me when I'm going to have a conversation with you. And hopefully the viewers are the beneficiary also.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you and the viewers. It's always exciting to be in human community.
Indeed. And that's what we're here to talk about is human community. You know, we've had some conversations in past series that we've done talking about different subjects, but you brought up and you've mentioned, and I've seen you, when I've seen you speak publicly, talk about the fact that humanity could be facing an extinction event. That, you know, this is getting to be pretty serious. And I heard you talk about this pre-COVID, before we entered this COVID world with all its madness, and it wasn't hyperbolic. I think you always give vision and hope as to how we can avert this, but there's some serious threats on the horizon. So, can you develop what you see and why you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, the science is really founded upon this intersection between soil health, gut health, the microbiome, and what we now understand is the foundation of human life as well as health. And that foundation is in this extraordinary power that sits within the microbiome in its vast variety. It is through biodiversity that we now find life being founded. And the microbiome is an extraordinary database of genomic intelligence that has emerged from this planet over about a 3.5 billion year period. And with each iteration of life over that 3.5 billion years, we've seen the rise and fall of life forms over and over again. We've seen 5 massive extinction events in the fossil record. And the interesting thing about those extinction events is that when we see massive loss of life, Mother Nature never accepts that as an endpoint. Mother Nature looks to it as an opportunity to reinvent itself with more complexity, more intelligence each time. The last extinction 55 million years ago with the dinosaurs left us without large animals for a large period of time. We lost about 93% of life on Earth, estimates say. And it's interesting that the nature never tried to struggle back to reinvent the dinosaurs. And instead, she leapt forward with the invention of birds and the invention of deciduous trees and the invention of mammals ultimately, and then humans come along. And so in this brief second of life on Earth, the 200,000 years that we've been here as a Homo sapiens, we are at this pinnacle moment of understanding this extraordinary reality that we are the result of this vast nature. We are not the manifest destiny to control her. And so that's kind of the science of what we step into, is that biodiversity, adaptation, and increasing levels of intelligence and complexity in life on Earth has been the trend for billions of years. And we have put ourselves in opposition to that in our science. And nowhere is that opposition more obvious than in our food systems and in the chemical engineering of that food system.
Wow. So, do you see with what's happened from COVID and the reaction to it, from the varying governments of the world, has this amplified any of the problems that already existed or accelerated any of these challenges?
It's symptomatic of it as well. I think there's been a general acceleration of these problems for the last 3 decades, and I see the recent pandemic and everything from the science narrative that came out of it all the way to the public health response, all the way to the regulatory and governmental decisions that have been made around it as symptomatic of this bigger trend rather than a cause of. And so, very early on in that event of the pandemic, I was having conversations with you guys and many others around what I thought was going to unfold. And that wasn't based on some sort of intelligence or supposition on my part. It was simply based on the track record of 30 years of progression of the belief that we were entitled to, and in fact, almost mandated to always improve our technologic innovation in this space of controlling biology, controlling life on Earth. We've done it on the macro level through, driving the extinction of every animal larger than ourselves since our origin. If you haven't, seen records like the Book of Sapiens and things like that, you realize our behavior of destruction and our tendency towards extinction behavior dates back hundreds of thousands of years in our existence. So what we see around us today is simply the culmination where you bring a universal, media voice alongside a narrow narrative of science and biology around a sociopolitical agenda that's tied up in economic forces that are highly reliant on the medical industrial complex. The medical industrial complex is arguably the only thing that's keeping the US economy intact. It's by far the largest financial sector we have. The military and all of our defense budget and everything else is somewhere around $680-700 billion a year, which is an insane amount of money. However, it's dwarfed by the $3.5 trillion, 3.8, I think is the most recent number, $3.8 trillion in healthcare spending. And so the pharmaceutical complex is necessary to keep a economy afloat that has no other economic levers to compete with that size of an economy. The entire agricultural budget is, or income and everything else for the US marketplace is around 1.7 trillion. So you add, which is twice the budget of the military. And so you add ag plus healthcare industry, farmers, and the same chemical companies kind of bridging those two worlds. The pharmaceutical chemical industrial complex now is the dominant force in the economics of the United States and most Western industrialized countries today. The other more, raw materials acquisition, construction, materials production, engineering, this has largely been outsourced to the third world or developing economies like India or China or the like. And so in that export of all the other activities that would drive GDP and economy, we now have healthcare and ag, our two chemical industries, as that foundation. And what we're seeing now is the emergence of an alignment between big capital, i.e. Wall Street, and the capital investment firms and everything else, realizing that this is the last harbor for the money to go. And so you see the likes of all the headlines recently with Bill Gates being the largest farmland owner in the world now. It's not because he likes farmland necessarily. Maybe it's part of some larger agenda of his, but I think the reality is it's simply the last place to put massive amounts of capital is in controlling the food system and medical systems.
Yeah, so, and you look at the forces you cited, the size, and I haven't heard the phrase before, heard military industrial complex, but medical industrial complex, but it's true, right? I mean, it's a behemoth that's almost beyond comprehension. And then you see legislators that are now hell-bent on, militarizing action towards fighting a virus, right? Which now basically starts to create resources, fear, agendas, all these types of things. So yeah, I think it does accelerate a lot of the bad things about what's driving us towards extinction. What do you think our timeline is? I mean, what is it that we would have to do, and in what period of time would we have to do it to salvage the situation?
First, I should start by saying the science right now is really keeps us in suspension right now as to whether there is actually an opportunity for us to get out of the extinction event. So I think that the predominance of the information right now at the human genomics and microbiome level is that it's too late. We've already set in motion the biologic events that are unfolding, and they are embedded in our genes. One of my areas of expertise is in this intersection between glyphosate and the herbicides and human health and how they cross-sect. And in my recent work, testifying before the EPA with their public session on glyphosate, we demonstrated, over 96 different, peer-reviewed science articles that have come out in just the last 3 years, and then a whole data bank of, previous 30 years of science that is pointing to the fact that we've already, through our genetic engineering of crops to tolerate more and more toxic stews of chemicals, we have already set in motion the epigenetic patterns in humans that will lead to our extinction. And this is demonstrated in mouse models where you at F0, which is the first generation, if you give a transient exposure of glyphosate to that mother while there's a child in utero, the F1 generation, that first generation after that transient exposure, they don't have any more glyphosate in their food. They're not exposed to glyphosate or Roundup again, but that one in mom sets into motion metabolic events in F1 that are detrimental. And so you start to see the emergence of chronic disease. By F2, you start to see fundamental collapse of metabolism. You see the emergence of obesity severe. You see the emergence of diabetes and other metabolic collapses of the neural systems, neurodegenerative conditions, and the like. And then by F3, you see fundamental collapse of the genome, in that we are now transitioning what is an accumulation of epigenetic and random genetic injuries that are accumulating in those first two generations. They transition to germline mutations in the third generations, which means they're now integrated into the sperm and the ovum and passed generation to generation. And so by the third generation, after transient exposure, let alone chronic exposure to glyphosate, we see the extinction level genetic injuries happen, where you get widespread, complete cessation of reproductive capacity and the like.
Thanks so much for being here and watching that video. And can I ask you to please subscribe to our channel so you can find out when we're posting new content. You'll be alerted right away when we do. To share this with people you think might benefit from the information, and certainly it helps us if you like the video. So if you like what you just saw, go ahead and hit that like button. And again, thank you so much for being here with me right now.